That's one of the ways I define inclusion, a willingness to be influenced by the so-called other, so-called. I think there's creating a sense of safety, and obviously I say psychological safety, but also couple that with a level of honesty. Like I'm safe. I create safety for dissent. I create safety for heterodoxy. I create safety for breaking stuff and not breaking it so it's just completely annihilated, but breaking it so that we can actually get stronger as a result of something that's broken.
You're listening to the Global Inclusion in Practice podcast, sharing the stories of DEI changemakers around the world. Vivian Aqua and Marjolein Vlug bring you behind-the-scenes stories and kitchen table conversations about the personal perspectives of DEI professionals, representatives, advocates, and allies, talking about what matters in this work and what sustains us in creating lasting change. There are many of us working on creating a more inclusive world. Let's share our stories. We're in this together.
Welcome, Amri, to the Global Inclusion in Practice podcast. We are truly excited to have you as our guest speaker for today, and I would like to learn more about you. So can you please introduce yourself to our listeners, and also who are you at this moment in time, professionally and personally?
Ah, at this moment in time, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a stepfather, I'm a son, I'm an uncle. I happen to work with organizations to engage with tension and complexity in their everyday work and to make the ability and the capacity to work with the intention and complexity, one could call it diversity, normative, and to create the conditions for everybody in the organization to thrive. So that's who I am. I'm an American that happens to live in another country. So I'm still trying to figure out if I'm a expat or an immigrant. My buddies say, "Man, you're an expat. That's the high status one. You got to go with that one." But because I still can't work in the local language, I'm not that skilled. Yeah, I mean, I probably this closest experience I've had to be an immigrant. So that's a great learning experience. So kind of externally, that's who I am.
So what country is that? Because, everyone's guessing now it's not Canada.
It's Switzerland. I live in Basel, Switzerland. Yeah, and kind of, I guess at my core, I'm a spiritual practitioner, and actually was probably spent more time in that space early in my entrepreneurial life than I did making money, and it's actually served me because I was grounded in something that wasn't about anything other than something greater than me from the outset. And so my orientation to the world, my orientation to my work is rooted in that. And I think that's really what's allowed me to maybe see differently when I need to, and be able to adapt, because that's always at my anchor.
Yeah, I love that you said that. But I'm also curious, how did an American end up in Europe? There is a story behind that,
And in
right?
There
Switzerland,
is.
especially, out of all places in Europe.
I was in I was at Novartis, the global pharmaceutical company, for almost a decade. And I was working in Cambridge on the other side of the pond and inside of Boston. But I was here in Basel, where Novartis is based quite a bit, and I met my wife here. And so we dated long distance. At the time, we were both traveling quite a bit, so we'd end up seeing each other on either in the U.S. or in someplace in Europe, probably monthly, because of my travel primarily. And then we decided we wanted to try to have a baby, and we couldn't. We thought, we'd do this long distance thing and try to make the baby, but it happened pretty fast. So we were both, my wife, I have stepkids that are 16. So we didn't know if it would happen fast, but obviously my wife has some superpower in her lineage, and it happened quickly. And so I moved here. I was here quite a bit, just still working for Novartis. So I'd come and I'd stay for a month or more. After my niece graduated from high school, she lived with me in the U.S. So once she finished and went to college, I would be here for a month or more. Once, especially once my wife got pregnant, I was here as much as I could be. And eventually in 2019, I moved. So yeah, my son just turned 5 on the 28th of March. So I came a couple months before he was born permanently.
Oh, that makes you a love pat, perhaps.
Yes, I didn't. That's a new one, Marilyn. That's a totally new one because yeah,
A friend of mine uses that word, love
I
pat.
love it. I
Yeah.
love it.
Well, there you go.
I'm also curious about just one thing. I'm also curious about you mentioned that you were working for different companies, right? And you made a essentially you made a transition to work for yourself. What was the aha moment for you to cross over?
I don't know if it was an aha because most of my career I've been an entrepreneur. So when I first, I'm an epidemiologist by training. So when I worked in public health, mostly in infectious diseases early in my career. And then as I was working in public health, I became a manager pretty early. I was probably 27, 28, and I had a team of like 11. And I think all but one or two were older than me, and I was bad. I was really just horrible at management. And I finally figured out how bad I was. And once I figured it out, got obsessed with trying to get better at it. And it helped. I had some really great people around me that helped. And then I just wanted to grow it. And I got obsessed with the whole idea of management, leadership. There's so many leadership theories. I got kind of obsessed with that. And decided that I wanted to do more of it. So I had some friends that were doing relatively similar work, and I just really shadowed them and went along with them with their clients. And in some cases, they brought me on because I had skills in public health around interviewing, focus groups, things like that. So they would bring me on the where I did have skill, and then over time, I just continued to build my own capacity in the space, and then I ended up, doing that work. And it was more management, strategic planning, facilitation early. So it wasn't the DEI proper stuff. And then I decided to open up a couple job boards. So I had a job, they were regional, kind of niche job boards in healthcare space because that's what I knew best. So one was Georgia HealthWorks. So it was the southeastern region of the United States. And then eventually I created one called Diversity HealthWorks, which I sold before I went into Novartis. And that's where I learned about DEI. And so I cold called several US based DEI firms. I think two of them reached back out. And one of them was Cook Ross. So it was Howard Ross started Cook Ross in the 80s, 90s, early 90s, I think. And he was just amazing mentor, been a pioneer kind of in the field, was starting the journey of unconscious bias education. That was like at the beginning. Howard was one of the first folks that launched that. So I got kind of a baptism into that for a few years before I went into Novartis. But I was an entrepreneur from the late 90s through 2009. Even within Cook Ross, I still owned companies and was working on them on their entrepreneurial venture. And then in 2009, I went inside to Novartis. So it's most of my career, I've been external consultant, entrepreneur, and I just went back to it. And I considered going back inside when I moved here, but I really wanted the flexibility. I'm busier than I ever, but I kind of control the tempo and the tenor, and that was necessary with 3 kids and wanting my wife to continue to build what she wants to build in her career. So it gave us a lot of space. I mean, the travel isn't always good, but when you're inside and you're pretty senior in a big company, you don't control your travel, and it's roughly 50%. And so you're just gone, and you don't get to meetings are scheduled, and you don't get a lot of options. So with the work I do now, I got options. And so the transition really back was natural. It was an interesting time because it was right in the middle of right after the murder of George Floyd. So I restarted formally at the beginning of 2021. And, I had friends that were chief diversity officers and working in the space. So I got work pretty easily to grow the firm because I want to grow more in this part of the world. That's a different beast. I've never had a Swiss company. I've never worked on another continent like formally for a long period of time without going back and forth. I still travel a lot to the US, but even when I lived in Brazil, I never thought about that I was going to live permanently in Brazil. So it's a very, I don't know the language that well. I'm dealing with all the business dynamics of reading, legal documents and documents from the government. And so, like, for me, I'm nervous a lot. Like, oh my God, I'm gonna mess this up because I don't know what they're saying. But I have a lot of good people that help me.
And you make it work. And did that social justice summer and the murder of George Floyd have something to do with you deciding to go back into
No,
consulting?
no. I actually, honestly, this was a little bit of a new version of the Matrix to me because there's been like multiple kind of social justice times where DEI has kind of pivoted towards a particular flavor, and I never pivoted with it. So it was, I think DEI principles, and if you stand on those principles, this work is essential part of how business gets done rather than what you do in reaction to an event or a situation. And so I didn't go in that direction because of that particular tragic event.
Well, what's an essential thing you'd like for our listeners to know about you?
Essential. I guess I'm an organizational culture advocate. I really believe that we can create cultures that thrive because we create the conditions for care, for interdependence in that care. We cultivate openness with each other so that people are willing to be influenced by each other. That's one of the ways I define inclusion: a willingness to be influenced by the so-called other, so-called. I think there's creating a sense of safety, and obviously I say psychological safety, but also couple that with a level of honesty. Like, I'm safe. I create safety for dissent. I create safety for heterodoxy. I create safety for breaking stuff, and not breaking it so it's just completely annihilated, but breaking it so that we can actually get stronger as a result of something that's broken. I create, we create the conditions together for trust. And I use the work of Louise Diamond. She's a peace advocate, and she talks about levels of trust. And, I trust that you are listening and taking into consideration my interests. I trust that you will be committed to helping me fulfill those interests. I trust that when I'm not in the room, you're able to represent my interests. And so the creating those conditions for care, openness, safety, and trust is kind of at the heart of how I see the work. And that means it's for everybody and it's accessible to everyone. It's not reduced to a particular aspect of our visible identities. And that's something that it's a principle for me, that if you want to make this work accessible, it has to be clearly accessible to everyone. And if you're advocating for a particular group of identity or groups of identities, that you understand that being of that doesn't mean that that's the only thing you're for, and that you have to signal that very clearly. Because I think what's happening in a lot of places in the world now is the pushback on DEI is because there's a signal that DEI is for somebody instead of that particular group at a particular point in time, or that might be the group that one practitioner feels the most affinity toward and therefore advocates for. That's fantastic. But when it's signaled that if you don't advocate the way I advocate and you're wrong, that's what I think the pushback is coming from. I think it's an ideological pushback. I don't think it's I don't think it's a principled pushback, because they
I appreciate what you just said. This is about trusting that other people will represent you when you're not in the room, and that representing lots of different people.
yeah, in the interest of all. Yeah.
And that's not just representing one group, but
No.
also representing others.
Yeah, and that's something that what I think you all there's a lot of people who have influenced me, but Dr. Roosevelt Thomas was a really a pioneer, like in the U.S. space. Coca-Cola had a big lawsuit in the, I think it was the late '80s, early '90s, around it was a racial bias lawsuit, and it was one of the biggest class action lawsuits around protected categories that we'd seen in the U.S. at the time. And Roosevelt Thomas, Dr. Roosevelt Thomas, who's also a Morehouse man, went to the same college I went to. He was the main consultant for Coke, and he wrote a book in 1991 called Beyond Race and Gender. 1991, he was talking about going beyond race and gender. And we're in 2024, and we're deeper into race and gender, as deep, if not deeper, than we've ever been. Not that you let go of it, it's just you can transcend and go beyond it, not because you're saying it's not important, but you're not saying it's the only thing that's important. And that was really at the heart of my work. Is I used to be a bit of a Dr. Roosevelt Thomas groupie. So I lived in Atlanta, and I would just find where he was going. I'd put on a suit and go to the business that was hosting him as if I worked there. It was, it was before all the security stuff. So they would say, "Oh, what's your name?" "Oh, Mr. Omri Johnson," and I just
Party
go. Yeah,
crasher.
I was crashing offices. That was my gig, right? Back in the early 2000s. So yeah.
Hi, I'm Vivian Aqua, the certified DEI consultant, and I would like to invite you to take your organization to the next level of understanding by collaborating with me. I specialize in helping organizations amplify their DEI initiatives and foster an inclusive environment. Reach out today to learn how I can help your organization unleash its hidden potential and create a culture of belonging.
Yeah. You mentioned that you are an organizational culture advocate. Can you share what that flavor means within the DEI landscape?
Well, I think when you think about organizational culture, it's complexity, it's the need to be able to adapt, it's the need to be able to bounce back when difficult things happen, it's the need to create relationships that have varying degrees of tension, complexity, weight of affinity, levels of connectivity in relationship, levels of networks, and by their nature, interdependence. And so that, as a DEI practitioner, that's what I'm mostly interested in, because that's what gets you the results of what I consider generative organizational culture, or a culture where you create more value than just the based on your P&L.
Yeah.
And so that, to me, is more at the heart of DEI work. Obviously, you're advocating at times for people that come from groups that have been less represented, but I haven't necessarily anchored on that as my main body of work. I think when you create the right conditions and you do that consistently, because if you go up and down, it's hard to maintain to get those outcomes that a lot of people believe in, like, increased representation and things like that. You can do that, but you're not going to be able to sustain it. It's going to go up, and that's what we've seen now. We everybody start hiring all the brown and black people, and it went up, and it's probably going to go down because you haven't created the conditions in your culture to keep them and to grow them and to help them see the world in a new way, that they could bring something that they wouldn't be able to bring if you didn't foster that and help them develop. So I anchor on culture because I think it's never going away. It's always evolving. It's the space kind of that we swim in. Sometimes we're aware of the space, most of the time we're not, but we do know what it feels like when it's not working for us, when we're not allowed to breathe. I think everybody uses the fish metaphor. When a fish doesn't know that they're in water until they come out of it. And sometimes you get in a company, you're like, "Oh, I'm swimming along," and then I come out of the water, it's like, why can't I breathe? It's because it's either the water isn't the water that you breathe. Maybe you're a saltwater fish and this is a freshwater pond, or you've actually been gotten out of the water, and so you can't actually swim the way you could swim, or something's occluded, something's in your path that you just keep bumping into, and you staying in the same place, so that water starts even getting stale. I can go through a lot of metaphors around that. So organizational culture is at the heart of our work, and so for me, creating cultures from the hearts of the people is what DEI means, and it means constantly growing it. It's not something that you do discreetly and stop. It's something that you're always in the process of. You're always creating new capabilities. Some people have different capabilities or different levels of those capabilities at different in different companies, and those folks have an opportunity to be what I call other stewards or skilled operators of an inclusion system. You're there, you've built these skills, now you can help the organization to continue to build them collectively, recognizing that interdependence of care and doing that in a mindful way constantly. Like it becomes normative rather than just kind of performative or temporary, or I felt good because I went through a training. It's no, you're building skills, you're building capabilities. That's the only way it's sustained. It's principle. And when you kind of rest it on principles and the culture that you want, you also recognize when it's not working and you do something about it mindfully and not with kind of vitriol, but with care. And then sometimes that means some people don't work, and that's okay too. But you even let them go with care and compassion rather than booting them out the door and making them wrong. 'Cause rightness, DEI people, sometimes we like to be right or self-righteous, but rightness has never transformed anything. And that's kind of at the heart. Rightness, I love to be in right. Don't get me wrong. I love it. It's one of my favorite things. But it doesn't mean that it's right. It doesn't mean that it's helpful. And so to recognize that is all right, that's not going to get us where we want to be. What do we need to do to shift, to stay open to the possibilities that come at me or at us, and respond to those in a mindful way, and so to keep creating those conditions for thriving together.
You shared so many golden nuggets that I had to say something, but I wanted to touch base on DEI is about building skills, right? Because too often people are being hired, or DEI practitioners are being hired for just that one night stand training. Can you elaborate a little bit on skill building aspect?
I started probably in 2012, 2013. When I went to Novartis, the research division had no DEI. And so the president of the organization, his name was Mark Fishman. I love Mark Fishman. He was so straight with me. He probably will never see this, but when I went into to an interview with him, Mark's Jewish, and Mark, we're talking. I think they'd already decided they were going to hire me, but Mark did this lecture before that called a sociology of innovation, and and I was just sold. I was like, wow, you're trying to create the conditions, he didn't say that language, but I was like, that's what he's trying to do, to create the conditions for an entrepreneurial like culture, for people to have some of the tough conversations that you have scientifically.
Yeah.
Obviously there was power. Mark was extremely powerful. He is extremely powerful. So he wasn't naive that power was still going to be there, but he wanted to create this space where people did push back. And you can see the people that left Novartis, they're CEOs, they're chief scientific officers in all these companies around the world. I mean, they're brilliant human beings. So just a group of the most brilliant people in the mostly Boston biotech pharma ecosystem, scientifically and business wise. So they were there. Anyway, after Mark did this presentation on the sociology of innovation, he had me sold. What got me sold even more is that we were going to be able to create it pretty much from the ground up. So we got to experiment. We had a big budget. We reported into the president. It was just awesome. Like so awesome. And part of that in creating the skills is we were actually doing more experiential work with teams. So one of the first things we did is we did these observations of scientific decision boards, and we were just looking at their advocacy and inquiry. and how well that they listened. So we were starting to teach skills in vivo, and maybe vivo is not the word, but it was basically live. We gave them what we observed right after they went through a section of the meeting. And then they went through the second section, and sometimes nothing changed because there was nothing wrong with any of the data. We just held up the mirror with them, and then they start seeing how that was impacting people that came in to present to the board, because they were these the senior people, and the junior people would come and present their science, and they tear them apart. And it wasn't bad. It was just that, is it creating the right conditions for the presenters to come in and do their best science and even push back on you? Do you, are you could put
Is
them
it
in
the impact you want to create in that way?
exactly. And so
Yeah.
they got to see that. And so that was directly on the work that they were doing every day. So they didn't see the DEI work as a separate thing. And that was the first kind of piece that I believe all practitioners should be thinking about, is how does this impact every single person, even those, straight white guys that everybody talks about. How does this impact what they're trying to create? And if it doesn't, they're going to think, oh, this is nice, and I'll kind of work in parallel, and I'll like them. Oh, it's nice. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's not necessarily going to be sustained. And so that skill of listening is always a magical skill that a lot of people don't have. They think that they're listening, but they're usually just waiting for when they can say what they want to say. So we got them into that, the skill of inquiry and asking good questions and learning questions, not just kind of let me stump you and show you how smart I am questions, because scientists, and I'm a scientist and I've done it. You want to seem smart. That's our capital, right? That's our cachet. We- it's not helpful all the time, but you asking questions to help these folks grow, because these folks were junior. They didn't necessarily have as much drug discovery experience as the group that was around the table. What are you doing to build their capacity, right? And so we started there. And then subsequently, I got into this notion of what I call inclusion systems design and development. And that was like, all right, there's certain things that I think everybody should understand, some historical. You need to understand what it takes to foster interdependence. You need to know how to do really robust sense making. You need to know how to understand the dynamics of our multi-dimensional selves rather than reductionist selves, and what that means. You need to build skills around metacognition. And Vivian, I think we met through cultural intelligence, so that's all kind of in your wheelhouse. You need to know how to do good, robust perspective taking, and you need to be able to know how to do your own inner work, and so that you're centered and grounded when things come at you that would put you in a place where you're like, oh, I'm not so sure about that, but being okay with that uncertainty. And those are skills that I think as a practitioner you have to embody, but then your goal is to help others go deeper into that. You haven't figured it out. It's, as a practitioner, you're really just learning and doing the dance with people there. You're there to facilitate, you're there to be a host in a way, so that we can all get better at it. Sometimes you're a coach, sometimes you're training with, there's all kinds of ways that can be framed. I fully believe in cultural intelligence. I think it's one of those kind of core capabilities everybody in organizational life should have, for not just kind of at the broad notion of cultural intelligence, which most people think is just cultural knowledge, but the more in depth metacognitive aspects and uh, aspects around how you strategize, etc. And then I believe that it's important, and we did this internally, is I think people need to understand informal social networks and organizations. So social capital becomes critical. Everything from your recruitment pipeline and the kind of networks you're developing before people come in the door, because the underrepresentation or disrepresentation or misrepresentation or however representation that you have is not going to be solved because you go hire a bunch of people and cherry pick them from another firm. Equity is going to be developed upstream. And if you really want to, I had a little issue with the affirmative action decision and how people just like went so crazy, and like DEI is being attacked. And I was like, no, it's not. We all knew that affirmative action was going to have to be gone because there's always a conservative in the US, a conservative Supreme Court is always going to emerge. It's emerged on all of our history. Eventually, one comes back. It's almost always been like that. We've mostly been a center right country, right? So it's not going to go away. And so when it came back, it went away. And Sandra Day O'Connor told people that, and people still didn't listen to her. But if the elite universities, I'm a little bit on a tangent here. You guys might hear some passion here. If the elite universities wanted to create more capacity to have people from underrepresented groups, go find those diamonds in the rough that parents didn't go to an Ivy League school and have the money to pay for them to go. Of course, those kids can get in. Of course, they were qualified to go to that school. Go find some kids that would never have a chance to go there because you didn't start working on developing them when they were 10 years old. You know what I mean? That's if we want to create equity, you create it upstream, you develop it, and then when kids are ready to apply to Harvard, they can choose. Like, well, do I want to go to Harvard? Like, I mean, I can go to these other places for completely free. It's a great school. Or I can go to Harvard because the network of Harvard is gold, and Harvard is at the center of a lot of universes in the world, some we can't see. So you get into that ecosystem, there's a level of privilege you get because of being there, and some people want that, right?
Yeah.
So that's like create things upstream. Don't wait till we're in stream or downstream to complain about it. Create it upstream, including Harvard, Yale, all the Ivies, all the elites. Do the work, and you have the resources to do it. So you can't say you don't have the resources to do it. You do. I got on a tangent. Oh yeah, social capital. I think we should be really deliberate about building relationships outside of our organizations over time. And some of these folks never heard about your firm. I have one client is a algorithmically traded hedge fund, and people don't even know about them. They're amazing. And I'm like, yeah, but we're not trying to be splashy, and we're not. I was like, yeah, but just get out there and talk to some folks. Let people know you're here. Let them know what you do, what it would take to be able to work in an amazing place like this. Because otherwise, you're going to just be recruiting people that you know or their kids, because that's who you know. That's what your network is confined to. It doesn't make you bad or wrong, and doesn't mean that the folks won't be great and won't do good work. But if you really want to create a heterodoxy, a different pot of perspective, start building some relationships so that folks, when they are ready, they come there and you can hire them, and they'll come from a variety of differences and similarities, and you'll get exactly what you say you want.
And you'll
So
be more visible as a good example.
exactly. It's self-perpetuating, because you start, when you build the network, basically starts operating on its own. You got to keep cultivating it, but you don't have to put in as much work as you necessarily did before, because it's more natural and normal.
Hey, are you ready to rediscover focus, clarity, and resilience so that you can be a stronger change maker for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? I am Marjolein Vlug. I'm a certified coach. And whether you're getting started in DEI or are further along in your journey, I can support you to take your work to the next level. With me as your ally, you can gain clarity on your next initiatives or career goals, make intentional choices, stay accountable to them, deal with the intensity of the work, and create real change. Let's talk. I'd love to learn more about you. Reach out, book a chat.
What is something that lights you up?
I guess you just heard how I got light up by the affirmative action.
What else? As a person, I mean, this is a work fascination. What lights you up as a person?
Let me see. I'd say
What would your wife say? She's seen it.
human capacity, like the possibility for all of us to get to a state of being where we don't see the other as separate from who we are, and that we see that level of connectivity, that I can call it a heart connection, that puts us all in the same kind of pool of the global ecosystem of humanity and all sentient life on the planet. So that possibility that we could all be enlightened. There's a notion in Buddhism where when Buddhas are considered enlightened, they've transcended into the ethereal or the heavenly realm. But bodhisattvas don't. Bodhisattvas, like, they incarnate and they could be enlightened because they've reached the level of enlightenment, but they come back to be with humans to help us elevate. And so the possibility of being a bodhisattva is probably what gets me the most excited, because it's the only thing that I believe is essentially like real. Like, I know that, you have the world, and a lot of people don't believe that the world is the thing because it's what you can see, touch, feel, smell, spin, whatever. But I because my foundation of even being in organizational life and professional life has really been, I started really focusing on my spiritual life more so than my material one. I always feel like that's where we should be going, and a lot of things would be resolved, and we'd all be able to live in peace if we focus there more than we focus on gaining or having or knowing or doing. We can focus more on being, and that's probably what gets me the most excited, if I should say. The sun's
Yeah, and it feels like it ties a lot of things together, that, you have these separate topics that you're fascinated by, and these separate things that you've explored and that you're, knowledgeable about. And it all sort of comes together in that.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I get excited by my son. He just got a bike with pedals.
Yay!
You all have third culture kids, so kids, they're speaking every language, and they just kind of combine them all. So he calls pedals pedals, or I don't I don't even know how he's saying it, but to watch him get on his bike and just really refuse us helping him, and then an hour later he's riding on his own after some falls and some crashes. But that gets me excited to you know keep doing what I need to do to be there for him and for my wife and stepkids. That also keeps me going.
It's a human connection on different levels.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
How do you run the marathon when success comes slowly?
The marathon. I think I'll just I'll use an example. I don't like to run long distance. So when you say marathon, I'm like, oh God. But I think it's the ability to adapt, and adaptation comes from developing sometimes new habits, sometimes maintaining the ones you always had. So in terms of this work, what's the diet you're taking in? Or you can use the analogy in both physical movement as well as movement in your career growth or in your practice as a DEI practitioner. What are you taking in? Like, are you being really open in your reading? Are you actually engaging with people that disagree with the way you think about DEI? Are you tapping into sources that you wouldn't tap into because they seem like they're contrary to you? People that you think are crazy, do you read them? Do you listen to them? And not just so you can react to them and write a post about it, but so you can actually be willing to be influenced to see maybe there's something there that I didn't consider in my work that will help me be better as a human and as a practitioner with clients or with my firm. So I think that taking in the right nutrients, I take a lot of stuff that's bitter in my everyday diet because I know it keeps me going, and those are habits that I've developed over time. And you got to do that as a practitioner. I think you got to try new things. So I'll go back to a physical example. I've had issues with my feet. I'm pretty tall. Relatively, I'm 191 centimeters, 6'3" for the Americans, and I'm not small. So I've weighed between 98 kilograms and 117 kilograms in my lifetime. I'm probably somewhere in the middle now. Wink, wink. And so I didn't like to run. I always weight trained. I played American football, so like that kind of stuff was cool. But then I, I've had these problems with my feet, so running always left my feet hurting, and so I just did walks or short runs or whatever. But recently, I decided to get rid of all the stuff that my doctors told me about my feet over these two surgeries and insoles or whatever they call those things, orthotics. And I just got rid of all of them and I started just wearing flat shoes. Like some people call them barefoot shoes. I know the Dutch, you Dutch are probably at another level around things like that. So I started wearing these flat shoes like in the middle of last year, and my feet and my ankles feel so much better. It's like night and day. So I'm about to start running with barefoot shoes. Now, I don't know what that's going to do, but staying on the metaphor, it's you're just building new habits and ways of being able to sustain your capacity and grow that capacity experientially so you can bring that back to the spaces in which you work. And so for
And you're
me,
checking in with yourself and trying things out and checking in, hey, is this working? Is this, growing my capacity and serving my health?
exactly. And that's the same way I'm doing all the time with clients. And so I think the marathon is you develop these skills and capabilities, you develop habits, you do the things that make you stay sharp, you do your own work as a practitioner. You have to. If you're not, you can't go any deeper with your clients than you can go within yourself. And if you can't go that deep, you're going to stay in one space. And some people, they have a set of tools. That's their tools. I'm not swapping anything out. I don't have any more room in my toolkit. I'm done. Versus, you know what? I need to get another toolkit, or I need to get rid of some of the tools that are there or let them stay at home in another box where I can take this toolkit with me and the tools that are actually going to allow me to do what I need to do, or get a bigger toolkit. Because there's lots of ways that you can do that. And excuse me, I think that's the marathon capacity is consistently building new habits so that you can be able to run it. And it's not going to be easy, even when you've prepared, but you know that you have the capability to do it and you have the mindset to push through when you need to. I think the last thing around that is kind of at the heart of what I hope organizations can do better is to build a sense of anti-fragility. And so, you know, I started reading Nassim Talib's Encanto series a long time ago, and Anti-Fragility was my favorite book in Talib's work because, and I use a story of more recently, in 2022, my niece, who is my heart, my brother died when she was 5 years old. So I've been kind of like a father figure to her, and and she's kind of had her own stuff that she's dealt with because of losing her father early, and but she's also had quite a bit of privilege because she's been in our family and she's gotten private schooling and lots of stuff. But it's still hard to live and grow up without your dad around. And she had a near death car crash in 2022, and she as a result she pulled herself from a car that then exploded, and while she was pulling herself she was dragging her right foot that was hanging on by a tendon, artery, and a nerve, and she eventually had to have an amputation on her lower right leg. Now, one thing we just kept saying is you know what, you're going to bounce higher, you know and she's doing it right, she's still getting there, but it's that anti-fragility that when you have a stressor, when you have something like this happen, it can actually not just bring you back to baseline, but it can make you stronger. And I think every organization has the capacity, if you build that into it. You can't be walking around fragile like a wine glass. You got to build that anti-fragility. And it's a big thing I'd always worked on with my niece. And I think it's now serving her that she can, you know, bounce higher even through something as tragic as she went through and the trauma that ensues. She's still working through it, but she's about to start driving again, so she's doing everything she has to do to get back there, and she's working, and still wants to go to dental school.
This
So
tears in both our eyes right now, just from the love and the care and the support
yeah,
that you're giving her.
she makes me proud. I mess with her a lot because that's what I do. But I didn't stop doing that when she had her injury. But it's can we create that capacity in organizational life to be anti-fragile, and you can't do that alone. That's the thing is like obviously you can lift weights and break your muscle down, your muscle gets stronger. That's an anti-fragile notion. But in organizational life, the interdependence, when one is not as strong, the other can be, so that we can all continue to get stronger and bounce back from whatever hits us. And so the marathon requires anti-fragility because sometimes you're in the middle of it and you're like, oh no, I'm done. Any of you that are runners or run long distances or even hiked or anything that you've done, you had to push yourself physically, or you all had children, it's a whole nother level. I think moms are the most anti-fragile humans on the planet. That's the notion that I want people to develop, is that anti-fragility, because you can bounce back when you have something difficult. I like to do hard things personally. That's how I keep my anti-fragility strong.
You like
But
challenges, yeah.
yeah, you need to do. I like to do hard things, right? So I think that's what we can all get constantly better at, is when we challenge ourselves and build those habits, and obviously use our community to help support that as well.
What I'm hearing is that, these are really rich, valuable things that you support others by reminding them, oh, hey, this is, remember, this is important. What is important for yourself to keep reminding yourself of?
That I haven't figured it all out. That I a lot of times that I just don't know, and that it's okay, because I like to be you do this type of work and you build your career on knowing stuff. You feel like a little anxiety when you don't know. And some stuff I knew and I forgot. And I'm like, oh my God, what is that? I don't even know how to do that anymore. Right. But it's okay to not know. And so I actually remind myself and be okay with not knowing. And when I do that, I have less anxiety. I actually can tap into something that's not in my brain or in my memory. It's something that's kind of uh, outer, beyond memory, beyond kind of knowledge. It sublimates from something of a higher consciousness.
Yeah, is it intuition or is it more
You
like
can call it
higher
intuition.
knowing?
You
Yeah.
can call it something more ethereal that comes from the universe or from the creator. And it's not anything that people don't know. It's just that at that moment, in that particular point in time, can you deliver that which creates the value that the folks that you're working with needs, or that you need to feel whole or feel like you can keep moving. So to be able to kind of put yourself down, put my ego down, I have to remind myself of that constantly. And when I do, it's always rewards that come from it.
Are you there for yourself too?
Yeah, and I try to do the stuff that I need to take care of myself. I'm not as young as I used to be, and I have a small kid, so like I'm really big on taking care of myself diet wise and things like that, and staying moving, and spending quality time with the people I love. My wife and I started doing heavy weight training together a few months ago, so that's
You
been
like
like
challenges, all right.
yeah, that's really fun, and she's really good, and she's
Ooh.
competitive, so she's always trying to beat me. I mean, obviously we're different sizes, but in terms of the proportion of weight she lifts to her body size, she's always like destroying me.
She's a
So
mom.
yeah.
That's all I can say.
So yeah, that's probably that keeping my ego in check and being okay with not knowing is pretty important for me to sustain myself.
Thanks for
I'm
sharing.
still letting your words marinate through my mind. And after this session, I'm definitely going to process and reflect on the things that you have shared, because you shared a lot, especially the part about your niece touched my heart. I had an injury last year, and what you said about your niece was so powerful to me that I'm still processing that. But throughout the whole interview, you also mentioned so many tips and recommendations that I feel a little bit challenged with asking this question, but I'm still going to ask it. And that is, what are your recommendations for those who are listening to a must have listen to, watch, or read when it comes to doing this work?
So much. My mother did her PhD when I was 8 or 9 years old. And so she would take me to Kansas State University. Sometimes she just had me sit in the library with her, other times in the student union while she was in classes. And the students would take care of me, but books were always like around, right? Like that was a big thing for my mother. And she's an educator. So I've done I ingest a lot. Like that's most of my day. I don't tell I obviously have to do work to get paid, but most of my day is really in books. Especially I'm in the process of starting to write my next book, so I'm reading more. I would say books on social capital, Robert Putnam, Mark Granovetter kind of talks about network centrality and things like that. I think those types of books. I recommend Nassim Talib's Encanto series, particularly Antifragility. I'm a big fan of Paulo Freire. Obviously there's a list of books that everybody started reading after the during the pandemic around Black authors. I think, you can get into Fanon and Baldwin and all those. I think those are important, but read them really carefully and know who the writers are, because you can go and you can read these things with a particular lens, and you might not even know all the context that those folks that wrote them are coming from. What is it about their lives? How did they live their lives? Not just what they wrote on paper, but how did they live their lives? And what did we learn from that? Who contradicted them? Who said, no, that's rubbish? How can you blend all that together? So anytime you read something that has one stance, find a way to read something that has a sometimes diametrically opposite stance. I think I've been reading Nora Bateson's new book, Combining. Bateson comes from a lineage of, you know, polymaths that just brilliant, and just the way she looks at humanity, this interdependent way of being is so beautiful, and the way she writes is so beautiful that I would say read anything by Nora Bateson. I think that Dave Livermore's work is always enlightening to read. I think every single human on the planet should read Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. Like everybody, I think it's one of the best books ever written in history. So I think everybody should read it. I think it's worthwhile to read the Confucian Analects and the
That's a
four
whole
book.
nother.
Yeah, the four books of Confucius, any kind of ancient wisdom books. If you're a Bible reader, I think you should go deep in both Old and New Testament. I think you should read the Quran. I During Ramadan, I do Quranic readings during Ramadan and throughout the year. So sometimes I just pull it out and read parts. I think those things, kind of the ancient wisdom and understanding the other, comes from us ingesting those things. So there's a lot. I mean, I follow a lot of people that a lot of folks don't think one should follow in the DEI space. So if I say it, I won't say it out loud because I don't want to get canceled. But I do it intentionally because I want to know what people have a different perspective than the majority of folks. I don't want to get caught up in the echo chamber, and I think we do it too much, particularly on social media. And get outside of it wherever you can, whomever you can. Even if you disagree, if you want to be mad for a little bit, that's fine, but still read it, right? Follow people that you don't like, not so you can just criticize them and make them wrong, but so you can be like, well, where's this coming from, and what about it can I take into consideration when I do my work or live my life?
I want to add in one book that wasn't mentioned, but should be mentioned, right? So the book Reconstructing Inclusion
I
by
don't
a
know about that
particular
book. You guys got to watch
author,
out for that one.
or the author that we are interviewing right now. So Making DEI accessible, actionable, and sustainable by Amri B. Johnson. I
Thank
want to
you,
add that
thank you,
one as
thank
well.
you.
Yeah.
That's a book I think is worth reading, but it's not necessarily your typical DEI book. So hopefully, when you read it, it will open up some conversation, and I'd love to. I'm always open to joining you for those conversations. So don't tell people that if I tell people now, if you want to talk to me, just reach out on LinkedIn. I'm never too busy to engage and to learn.
Oh, that's a beautiful invitation. And we're going to make a good list in the show notes, and your book's going to go on top of that list, obviously.
Thank you.
At the end of this episode, there's so much wisdom that you've shared, so many insights, so many ideas. What would you like to leave our listeners with? Others in DEI, what's important for them to remember and to sort of stick in their heads at the end? What do you want to give? What do you want to share?
Being right has never transformed anything. And so the more we're willing to be influenced by the so-called other, the more we can develop a level of discernment because we're willing to be influenced. I think we can do work that's accessible to everyone, that creates the conditions for everyone to thrive, for the organization to give value beyond just its profit and loss statement, for us to care for one another, be open, safe, create a space where people feel safe to dissent and to engage robustly, and that we build that trust, particularly when you're not in the room. So I think those are the things that are kind of at the heart of the work. I'll leave with a story. When I was in college, Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael of the Black Panther, when he was still calling himself Stokely, he came to speak at Morehouse in chapel. We had chapel every week. So he was one of the speakers. We had speakers, everyone from, the heads of state of countries to Denzel, to lots of people came to speak. And Kwame Ture came to speak, and, he's just a great orator, rhetorician. And he kept using this refrain. He said, "Do you love your people, love your people, love your people?" He kept saying that the whole time. And in my head, I was like, oh my God, my people make me crazy. But what he was asking is, do you see your people as you? Do you see your people as something that goes beyond just the way you look? Do you see the humanity in each other? That's how I took it later. And I think when I get tired, I still want to be able to see that humanity and choose it every day. And that's what I hope that we can do and help each other do better in organizational life, even when it's tough, even when it's not pleasant, even when it doesn't always feel the way we want it to feel. We don't forget that our humanity is at the center of everything. And if we kind of anchor on that, things usually bounce higher.
Wow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the beautiful conversation.
Thank you. Thank you
It was
for
a
having
pleasure.
me.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening. You're warmly invited to pause for a moment and think about what stood out to you from this conversation. Please share this episode with others to inspire them too. Make sure to subscribe to our Substack channel. We'll be back soon with more episodes. Be well, take care, and stay connected.